Hello, my beautiful co-creators. Lilu here. Today I'm with Eileen Barker over in San Rafael in California on a Juicy Living tour. And this is one juicy lady. Another beautiful treat for us today. Thank you.
Thank you, Lilu.
Thank you. It's amazing the connections and how everything is working out in a beautiful synchronistic
Yes.
way in the tour and how many people we know. And it's just amazing. And you have a remarkable... a quite special story because you're originally a lawyer and now you've been practicing mediation for 25 years.
Yes.
And now you're developing forgiveness tools and so much more beyond that maybe legal system that is not really giving answers to the real issues.
Exactly. Yes.
So tell us about your story and where you started from and where you're at
Okay.
now.
Okay. I started as a lawyer 30 years ago, traditional. I was doing litigation, working in a courtroom, and I quickly realized this wasn't really for me and started in search of some alternative way to use my education. And it took a while, about 10 years, but I discovered mediation, which is a way to help people resolve conflict instead of doing battle in court. So that was very exciting to me, and I just committed myself to that path. And that was about 20 years ago. What I quickly learned, though, is that although mediation is very effective at helping people settle lawsuits, that I was noticing that oftentimes people were reaching an agreement, but they were still hating each other. Sometimes they didn't even want to go back into the same room together to sign the paper or shake hands. I thought, sometimes that's just really not good enough, especially when people live next door to each other or are going to have kids and raise them together, or they're family members or business partners who spent 30 years together. And we shouldn't settle for that. We should go for a better resolution. And so along the way, I discovered forgiveness and the power of forgiveness, and became very inspired to learn about it, and I started teaching and writing about forgiveness. And I'll give you sort of the overview, and then we can go back to whatever you want to go back to. And then after exploring forgiveness, I have come full circle now to bringing that back into mediation and helping people who are just starting in conflict. Maybe it's before they filed a suit, or maybe they have filed one, but to say, let's get you onto a different trajectory right now, so that instead of going the path of, just being bitter enemies and, warfare, essentially, let's take this to a path where there can be some real healing. And recognizing that forgiveness is going to come later for those people, but they can start taking the beginning steps in terms of how they communicate and how the path they take to get to their agreement. They can start laying the groundwork so that in the end there'll be wholeness for them individually and in the relationship.
Who are your inspirations along the way? Because I saw in your book the Desmond Tutu, It's wonderful.
Desmond Tutu, right. Well, this was very fortuitous. But in 2005, I was attending a conference in Washington, D.C. and staying with a very close friend. And one night I just happened to pick up a book because I wanted something to read. It was Nelson Mandela's autobiography, which is an incredible book. And it's a long book. I couldn't put it down. And I just read that book, and in it, Mandela talks about how, first of all, how he was in prison for 27 years, and yet never harbored any hatred towards anybody, even though it was completely political imprisonment and very unjust in many ways. And he endured much hardship, but still he did this all with an open heart. And when he came out of prison, really, with forgiveness towards everybody. So that was inspiring to me. He talked about how Gandhi had influenced him, and he talked about how he and Desmond Tutu established the Truth and Reconciliation talks. And although I'd heard of all of that before, it just somehow really went in on a cellular level to me that these men had made such a profound choice, because they could so easily have said, we're going to have war tribunals, we're going to punish the people who were in charge of apartheid, but they said, no, what we really need is healing, and the path towards healing is to have people tell the truth and talk about what happened and forgive. And I just thought, if these people could go, and it's not by any means was not easy or perfect, but if they could undertake that under those conditions, surely, neighbors who are arguing over a fence line, or business partners who are arguing over royalties, or a husband and wife who are arguing over how they're going to divide their property can begin to think about forgiveness. And it's something that we certainly should be talking about in our legal system, but of course we don't. So I became very inspired and passionate about it.
Mm-hmm.
I also really studied Gandhi and read a lot of his writings and biographies, because he really had inspired Mandela. And so all of that just became, a great inspiration to me to delve into this and to make the claim, to claim it for ourselves that this is what we need. This is what's really missing. We don't have a positive model for how to resolve conflict. We have a war model for how to resolve conflict. And if you're mad at somebody, blame them, punish them, get even. That's what we're taught, and that we need to start discovering and teaching new models.
And really that it's coming from the inside. I mean, they were free already. They were emanating that peace. They were, when Mandela was in prison, or Gandhi, they were that change already themselves.
Right. That's right.
So that's a big piece, right? It's coming from us instead of us waiting outside.
Waiting for what the other. That's a very good point. Yes, Mandela took that stand. It wasn't conditioned on what anybody else did or didn't do. Yeah. Gandhi consistently took his stand for love and peace, regardless of what the world around him did. Yeah. And they had a profound effect by doing that. So that's right. I think that's one of the great lessons for all of us, that we have. It's up to us to take that stand for ourselves, that we're going to keep choosing love no matter what is coming at us. And that is not an easy thing to do, but it's essential.
Because we get hooked. And there's some things that get us hooked. And then it's hard to just dissolve them or be with them. I mean, what is your approach to that?
Right.
What is your approach to coaching, or not to coaching, sorry, to mediation and to a new way of communicating in conflicts?
Yes, well, it's exactly, first of all, I just want to agree that it's exactly what you've just said. I noticed myself and people around me, no matter how much work they've done, how spiritual, how conscious, how well-intentioned, conflict is sort of our Achilles heel. It's the one that'll get us and really hook us still. So it takes a lot of intention and discipline, actually, to take a path through a conflict that isn't, and unhook ourselves. But what I'm offering in my work, especially in the conflict transformation work, is a path where people can really become aware of how they've gotten hooked. And instead of seeing on the title of on the front page of my book, I have a quote from Kenneth Cloak that says, "Every conflict teaches us what we most need to learn." And I have found that to be very profound and very true. Every conflict teaches us what we most need to learn. So first is to view the conflict as an opportunity to teach us something really important, instead of just a big problem that somebody else caused and it's their fault. Is if you just stop there, you kind of missed the whole point. So in that work, I really take people through their conflict and help them see what it is they have to learn, what's their opportunity. And the results are amazing. It's truly transformational, because just like relationships reflect back to us who we are, so do our conflicts. And if you're willing to really look at it, it is a path of healing and transformation. In mediation, obviously the challenge there is having two people do it, sometimes simultaneously. But so I'm not working with it as directly in mediation, but I'm still laying groundwork. If I notice that people are caught in blaming, for example, then we can talk about blame and what a dead end that really is. And, there's a lot more to be said about it, but that, we'll work on that. If a lot of conflict, I've often said probably over 90% is failure of communication. So a lot of the work in mediation is just helping people slow down and really listen to each other. And it's amazing. I mean, that's a pretty simple thing, but when we're in conflict and we're in fear, we don't do it.
No.
And then it escalates.
We retract instead of
Right.
expanding and listening.
Exactly.
So what are the different, do you have like steps, and is there a process or some tips that you can share with us?
For the conflict
Yeah.
transformation and forgiveness, definitely. The first step, I think, is to remember that this conflict is an opportunity. And so the goal, so really shifting the goal to what can I learn from this? The biggest step that somebody can make is to turn their focus from external to internal. If I'm in conflict with you and I'm all focused on what you did, what you said, what you think, I'm really looking in the wrong place. So I have to really disengage. That's the first step. Disengage from my blaming you, all of it, and be willing to look inside. Okay, what's this about for me? So that's a huge step. I would say once you've done that, that's the hardest step for many people, because it seems so clear to them that it's about this other person and what they did. It really, the real gems are not external, they're internal. And so I would say that's probably the biggest thing is to look inside with the belief and attitude that there's a treasure here for me. As hard as the situation is, there's something here for me. The second thing that I've learned that I want to share is that people's conflicts may seem very random, but they're not. Just like I think a lot of people understand that we get into relationship with certain people, and it's often connected to our own templating of our emotional experiences that we've had earlier in life and what we carry with us, and then we somehow find somebody who just matches that or triggers it perfectly, and the same thing happens in conflict. So that is the next piece, is to look at what is this bringing forward in me that really doesn't have to do with the other person, but has something to do with some unfinished emotional business of my own. And then the real work begins to heal that. But that's the real beauty of it, is that you have an opportunity to not just resolve the conflict, but also to have a healing of something that could have been a difficult, emotional issue for your whole life.
Yeah. And would you say that there's a spiritual dimension to conflicts?
Very much so. There's, conflict engages us on all levels. Physical, we know. Mental, we know. Intellectual. Emotional, it should be obvious. It's not really in the legal system acknowledged, but obviously emotion. Conflict's very emotional. But it's also spiritual. And actually, I think this is why so much conflict resolution is inadequate, because unless you address all those levels holistically, there's still something unfinished. And the spiritual level has to do with coming back to wholeness. That this is my view of it, is that we are essentially whole beings and perfect beings, and we don't usually experience that when we're in conflict. And so to experience ourselves that way and the other person, and to reestablish, or maybe establish for the first time, a oneness consciousness with that person, rather than feeling separate and different and the right wrong, to get back or to go to that level is very spiritual, and is definitely the opportunity in every conflict. And that's the ultimate healing, is to see that person is no different than you. They've given you a gift, and nobody, no mistakes have been made, and it's all been perfect and for healing. And that's a profound, spiritual journey. All of this is a profound spiritual journey. And that's where forgiveness, that's the healing that forgiveness offers, because through forgiveness, people can come back to a set. When I really forgive and I really am at peace with what happened, then, to me, that's synonymous with that state of oneness.
Yeah, and like the Ho'oponopono, it's like it's not even on a cellular level, just forgiving. Thank you. Yes. I love you. I mean, I love that. Tell us about that. Tell us about what you think of the Ho'oponopono.
Well, I love it too. I think it's those 4 simple statements are so profound. I love you. I forgive you, I'm sorry, thank you. I think that if we just said that, those 4 statements embody everything we ever need to say.
For everything,
for
really.
everything.
Even things that seem separate from us.
Yes, and including to ourselves. I find myself sometimes saying that to myself when I, screw something up. Okay, I love you, I forgive you, I'm sorry, thank you. But if we I think it's very profound.
And something happens on the cellular level, doesn't it, about forgiveness? It like liberates energy.
Exactly.
The cells are vibrating again.
Yes,
the energy is flowing.
Releasing, that's the other thing. It's unseen, so we don't often appreciate how toxic the energy is when we're contracted and shut down, but we're actually holding it in our body. And there's mountains of research that shows how bad that is for us.
And diseases.
Cancer, heart disease, stress, yes. And when you really forgive or you do the Ho'oponopono, it releases that so that, as you said, you can really be fully alive and free and present. Because the other thing about conflict is that it's all in the past. It's all a story about what happened in the past. And so if you're still angry at somebody for something that happened 3 years ago, that part of you've got sort of you've used up some of your hard drive.
Yeah.
You don't have that available space for now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for the future, it affects the future as a consequence.
Right. Yeah.
So you must have had some incredible stories, or
there are incredible stories. I feel so fortunate to have discovered this work and to be doing it. I feel like my clients have been very courageous to come along on this journey with me, but every one of them, Lilu, doing this conflict transformation work has had an amazing result, really a transformational experience, because what they get to see is that there was something, it's like the conflict and the other person is like the tip of the iceberg. And when they do this work, they get to the iceberg and melt it and free it up, free up all that energy that they usually weren't even aware of.
And sometimes it has to do with forgiving ourselves. Huh?
It always, in my experience, ultimately, there's always a piece of self-forgiveness that has to be done at the core. Because we're almost always harder on ourselves, and there's always something in any situation that we have blamed ourselves for, or been upset with ourselves, or disappointed. And so we have to come back to that healing.
I want to show everybody to this workbook, because I think it's brand new, isn't it? Or not to... The forgiveness workbook, and it's got the little meditation CD. So there's tools out there that exist. It's not like we're on our own now these days.
There are lots of tools, yes.
Yeah. And so writing it down, I guess, listening, visualizing what's happening in this whole process. What is that step by step?
Step by step, it gives people a chance to start by writing down what their situation is and how they see it, because that's really important, is to just take a snapshot of how it lives in your psyche right now before we do anything with it. And so that's always the first step. And then to recognize that you've created a story, and it's the story you tell yourself that creates the suffering. And so first get it down, and then step back enough to say, oh yeah, that's my story. Which again sounds simple, but that's a big step. When you're in it, you're not thinking, oh, that's a story. You're thinking, that's reality.
That's real.
That's real. So just engaging just enough to see, well, it's the story I created. And the work, there's 10 steps. They take the person through a process of really and ultimately rewriting the story, so that when you think about that person or that event, you're not seeing it as, you're not feeling like you're a victim, you're not blaming anybody, you're really saying it from an empowered whole place, including what was great about it, what was perfect about that experience, which is surprising for people, that they would ever find something, that they would be grateful for. But if they do the work, that ultimately they will be grateful.
Because if we come from a place of our higher self and we see a situation, we see it differently. We see why their higher self maybe didn't have the courage, or for other reason they might have come into this conflict, and it's very freeing, to see that from that perspective. It reminds me of Brendan Bay's work too. around the fire camp, and we had to go around the fire camp and bring in the people that we had conflict with, and just have this conversation, tell them everything that we had to say, and then all of a sudden come from another place and see that finally, you know, maybe they have their own regrets, or they're not very proud of not being courageous enough to have choose differently. I mean, it's really, there's some great work out there. It's magnificent.
Yes. We mentioned earlier Colin Tipping, and I think
radical forgiveness.
Yeah, radical forgiveness, very powerful and very important, because he really talks about the perspective of, you know, he says, in my words, what if you came into this life exactly to have that relationship, or exactly to have that scenario unfold, so that what if that was exactly what was supposed to happen and was perfect? And he says, even if you don't believe it, it doesn't matter whether it's true or not, but to just approach it from that framework. And the only thing that you have to give up are our preconceived ideas. What was supposed to happen? What's right? When something bad happens to us, we tend to think, oh, that shouldn't be happening. That's wrong. That's a mistake. Well, the other person, I think, who addresses this so powerfully is Byron Katie.
Oh yeah, the work.
Who says so? How do you know? You know, and what if it's all just exactly what it's supposed to be? And that is very hard for us to accept, but it's also very freeing.
So it's really the gift of forgiveness.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you so much for this beautiful time,
Yes, you're so
for this
welcome.
connection, for sharing this information with all of us. Thank you.
Yes, good to talk with you.
Okay. Much love, my beautiful co-creators.
Bye-bye.
Bye.